Hi, good evening. It's another wonderful Monday night again. And so tonight I had in mind to answer a question that one of my friends came up with. And so, as with the other times, if you have a question that you would like to have answered, you can go ahead and post it in the comment section. And if I can't get it to tonight, I may be able to get to it in a future presentation. So basically, he was asking a little bit about what is the difference between one of my favorite authors, which is Dr. Greger with his How Not to Die book and his many, many videos and articles and presentations on nutritionfacts.org, as well as another favorite physician, Dr. McDougall. Specifically, he wanted to compare the two approaches between McDougall and Dr. Greger. And I would like to first start off with some of the similarities. So basically, as I speak a lot in clinic and talk to a lot of people in person about in various avenues, is that basically the foods that we choose to eat on a day-to-day basis can either be the basis for health or the basis for disease. Now, is that an absolute? Of course not. There's always going to be some exceptions to that rule. But the vast majority of diseases in our country can and will be improved through eating more plants in general. Now, it is to say that when somebody first hears about this, sometimes they get this idea of, oh, well, you just want me to change what I'm doing. And in some cases, I guess there is some truth to that, because if I'm talking to somebody who is a tobacco user, having known so many people that suffered as a consequence of the tobacco habits, lung cancer, throat cancer, stomach cancer, bladder cancer, skin cancer, not to mention all the COPD and other problems that come along with the tobacco. Very naturally, because I have seen the consequences of years of that lifestyle habit, I'm very naturally drawn towards wanting to help people to move away from it. So if you're a tobacco user, please call 1-800-QUIT-NOW or any of the other numerous websites and resources available to help you get off of that habit. Dr. Neil Barnard of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine also has compared tobacco with the meat habit that people have these days, and that they're both very damaging to the body, especially in the format that most people get their animal products from in the current format in the United States as well. But at any rate, that's just a little bit of a background, because when talking about the diet pattern that gives the most profound effects on health, in other words, that is able to reverse heart disease, reverse diabetes for the most part, and also to promote weight loss and feeling full and feeling energetic, and also to help people with their mood. I mean, the health benefits of this one dietary pattern are innumerable, and as we spend the next few weeks and months potentially going through some of these additional health benefits, it really feels a lot like the same story over and over with different flavors, so to say, or different flares to things. Next week, for example, I'm thinking of doing a talk on erectile dysfunction. Well, same sort of stuff as I'm going to be talking about tonight, however, with a few different tweaks to it, so to say, to push in the direction of that particular manifestation of disease. So, what is Dr. Greger and Dr. McDougall talking about, and what is different between their approaches? Well, every human being that you talk about on the planet or talk with is going to have a slightly different approach to pretty much any topic. So because they're two different people with two different backgrounds, they're going to naturally have two different approaches. Dr. McDougall, basically, you're logged in as me. Dr. McDougall basically has the philosophy and background that he's looking at history and saying, well, look at the world and look at civilization. And people grew up historically from bread baskets or from rice baskets or barley baskets or potato. And so all of the major starches have played a very big role in human civilization and have played a very large role in cultural development over the ages. The flavor or the type of grain or starch, as he puts it, has been different depending on where people have historically landed. So some parts of the world, South America grew potatoes and corn. I mean, it's earlier version, of course, maize before it turned into modern corn, as well as in Rome they had wheat and barley and rye and so forth. And so the founding principle is that humanity has evolved with and lived with starch producing plants for eons, essentially. And some of the earlier evidence for that, people talk about the paleo diet sometimes, and little do they know that what people currently presume to be a paleo diet, which is presumed to be largely meat and maybe some raw vegetables or steamed vegetables in the current version, I think, and to be very low on the processed foods, of course. That's the one thing that the paleo diet has going for it, in my opinion, is that it does get people away from the boxed and prepackaged junky kind of foods and fast foods. The downside of the paleo diet is that basically people end up with a diet pattern that, although sometimes it can be very initially helpful for a very quick weight loss, the first couple of pounds are usually water weight. And when people follow the very strict pattern on that pattern for a long time, yes, sometimes they do achieve ketogenesis. In other words, they're metabolizing the proteins that are in it. However, it's at great cost to their body. In other words, the arteries are getting clogged up with all the fat. The insulin receptors, if you've seen my recent insulin diabetes, pre-diabetes video, please go watch that, because it explains essentially in a nutshell what the major problem is with the paleo diet, because of all the saturated fats and the baggage that goes along with it, especially in today's modern eras when you have all sorts of hormones and other things going into the meat that have a deleterious effect on the body. And so the theory is that if people were chasing down gazelles and deers and all that kind of stuff, that theoretically somehow these Paleolithic peoples were stronger and healthier and hardier, and that it's the original diet. However, that is a lot of myths, and there are some very lovely people who've done some great presentations disputing those myths, which I'll try to find some later after we finish and post a few of those below. You might find that to be interesting watching as well. So the other thing is looking back historically in time. Well, how far back in time are you looking, and at what part of the world are you looking as well? So the people who have grown up in Alaska and the Arctic for hundreds of thousands of years, well, they basically are going to naturally have a different diet pattern than people in, let's say, the Vietnam area, or let's say the China area, India, South America, Africa, Middle East. Again, a lot of the cuisines have a lot of different local flavors. Hello to the people who are joining us as well. And so the issue is that not only do you want to look back a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years in history to see, well, what have people been eating historically that they seem to kind of do okay by versus what they're doing today, but also what is our great ancestors, what was it that they were eating? And I find that people fall into two camps on this. I did spend a few years in Mississippi, so I got acquainted with a lot of wonderful folks, and the biblical version of the story where the earth is only 6,000 years old, Adam and Eve, lived in a garden, actually tends to fit very nicely with the diet patterns that my two gentlemen that I'm talking about here basically talk about as being some of the healthiest diet on the planet. People even do I'm blanking out, I think it's the David fast or something, where they are essentially having spelt and grains and vegetables and basically are essentially having a so-called fast for a month or so, and then at the end of that they check their cholesterol and they check their blood sugars, and are often amazed to find that when they avoided the foods of the rich folks, so to say, of the time, they also avoided the diseases of those same rich folks of the time in biblical times. At any rate, so even Adam and Eve, they grew up in a garden, the Garden of Eden. They were eating, you would presume that they'd be eating mostly plants, as they were, first humans into this garden. So anywho, this is the story I'm saying, and of course, I don't mean to get into anybody's personal religious ideas, but the story works regardless of whether you're thinking of the primeval humans as coming from a garden, or if you're looking at the evolutionary theory, which is essentially that our ancestors came from ancestors, and all the way back through time, through the times where we shared the earth with Neanderthals, and so on and so forth. The further back you look into time, let's stop at the paleo folks, who were about 10,000 years ago or so. Again, you have a different model of how the earth and the world works, depending on which model we're talking about. And what they found is that the so-called hunter-gatherer tribes, when they actually looked at the teeth to find out what kinds of stuff was actually still in the between the teeth of the people who had died 10,000 years ago, they were actually quite shocked to find there was a lot of grains. And I think one of the reasons why people had been thinking that they were so totally meat heavy is that plants, when they are preserved over time, they have a tendency to degrade very quickly, and so it's a little bit harder to find evidence of their use. And that being said, we have found ancient bowls where they're able to find scraps of barley or scraps of oatmeal or things. So oatmeal apparently is one of the oldest foods on the planet, and for good reason. It's extremely healthy for you. So at any rate, and so even the paleo people, when they're going back into actual archaeological things, it's easy to get swayed a little bit by a good story. It matches with what the culture is trying to tell people, and it's easy to get swayed by the presence of bones in certain locations, because bones very easily withstand the test of time. But if you look at what was actually in the mouths, and if you also look back at what was coming out the backsides and the hair as well, then what you find is that the stool of the folks that lived about 10,000 roughly years ago was actually extraordinarily fibrous. I mean, it was like these people were chewing on tree bark or something, and who knows, maybe they were. But basically, it's like 98 or 99% plant-based, even at that time. And so I like to say sometimes Adam and Eve were not born in a McDonald's, and our paleo folks certainly are not running around in the same sort of fast food era. So our diet over the eons has very naturally changed. Well, if you keep dialing back the cosmic clock of time to even earlier stages of humanity or even pre-humanity, well, what you find is that the modern theory of evolution is that us modern humans came from proto-humans and so on and so forth down the line. And eventually you reach these folks, or proto-humans, who were essentially very similar in nature to our modern chimpanzees. In other words, it was prior to that, a common ancestor before the lineages split apart? Well, if you look at your modern versions of this, our living chimpanzees, great apes, who we share 99.9% of our DNA with, and you'd expect the same physiology, well, what are they eating? Again, the chimpanzee in the wild is not eating at our local fast food restaurants or not down the street at our local Dunkin' Donuts, for example. They're basically same as our own great ancestors. Their stool is 98-99% plant matter. Of course, I think the chimpanzees might have a few more termites or bugs or grubs or something like that kind of come along with the territory. But again, it's one of those things where you look at what the modern equivalent is having to get a look at what might have historically been happening. And so since we do share 98% of our genome and our physiology with our modern kin, or if you look back with Adam and Eve, depending on which side of this camp in particular that you fall on, well, you find something very similar. If we take a modern human and we put a lot of the high-fat foods into our bodies, then we get a lot of diseases and we end up dying prematurely, coming down with cancer, very similar to our folks that are smoking. They come down with illnesses sooner. If you are not moving, if you're not exercising, again, our bodies are designed for movement. That has a big effect on our health and our physiology. And if you're not eating a lot of plant foods, well, our bodies, there's so many areas of our bodies that are designed to have a lot of fiber, that are essentially designed to have, 98% fiber, or plant foods passing through the system. Another aspect to look at is human breast milk. So again, if you're looking at what is the perfect food for a baby designed to be given essentially through the human breast, whether it's through millions of years of evolution or by some other means by which we, became mothers and able to feed infants for the first year or so of life or more through this wonderful avenue, you'll find that the breast milk of humans is extraordinarily small amounts of protein in there. And so even cows whose milk is designed to essentially put a few hundred pounds on a calf in a very short amount of time, even they have much higher levels of proteins, which may feed into the presentation I did the other night on the higher rates of type 1 diabetes in the children that had their early diet supplemented with this cow's milk protein, or cow's milk that basically expose their system to a foreign protein that got them more sensitive to developing type 1 diabetes. At any rate, so the idea is that through a number of different markers, again, whether you're looking at our ancient little mousy ancestors that kind of turned into other things that eventually, over eons and eons of development, turned into the beautiful human beings that we meet and interact with every day. Or if you're looking at the world through a different perspective as to where is our origins and what is the perfect foods, or even not perfect, but what are the best foods for health, you actually find that there's a lot of similarities depending on where you're looking at it. So one of the things I'd like to point out too is that in the stories as well, and I apologize, my camera does reverse letters, so on all the little presentations I've had to write things backwards in order to get it to show up forwards. So I will spell. This is the How Not to Die book by Dr. Geiger. So his approach is not simply just focusing on, well, what has modern society been doing with ourselves for the last, 5,000, 6,000 years, and thus pointing out that we're civilizations that have been raised on different kinds of grains as the foundation, and then everything else is kind of added into that. Well, he's looking more at the amount of research that's been done over the last, especially 100 years, and gleaning from that very similar conclusions, actually. And so it's kind of fun, but the two of them both have a red light, green light, yellow light system. And again, I apologize, this is going to be a backwards presentation, but I will read it for you here. Maybe I'll take a picture and post it in the comment section so it's easier to see. But for Dr. Greger, green light means go. And so they're both trying to simplify the diet pattern into something that makes it easy for people to follow. So unprocessed plant foods. So what does that mean? Well, he focuses very specifically on basically 11 different types of food, and then one added thing of the exercise to make it his daily dozen. And of course, fluids and such is included in there. And it doesn't mean that life should be restricted to the dozen. He picked them especially because of their health benefits. Cancer, for example, can be more easily fought with lots of foods such as broccoli in the system. And again, disclaimer here, I'm not telling you that cancer is the cure. I mean, broccoli is the cure for cancer, but there's been research, for example, on survivability. Women with breast cancer, for example, that have a couple of cups of broccoli tend to have a much better 5-year survival. Women that have a little bit of soy every day, details to follow, have, again, lower odds of developing breast cancer and then better odds of surviving it, and so on and so forth. Broccoli also tends to be associated in the research projects with lower lung metastases. In other words, if somebody has lung cancer, it's a little bit less likely for it to spread. So a lot of the things that people forget is that pretty much everything you put into your body, you're essentially feeding this wonderful, wonderful organism, a machine that, if given the right circumstances, has a tremendous amount of power to engage in its natural healing and defenses and so forth. And there's actually been a heck of a lot of research on this topic and many others in the last 10 years. So when he's talking about unprocessed plant foods, it doesn't mean, you're going to go chewing on raw cucumber leaves or something all day. Far from it. I mean, although things like a salad can be a very healthy addition to your diet, or a green smoothie where you're throwing things like spinach or kale, some berries, a little soy milk, or maybe banana or something in there. Basically, it means unprocessed, meaning these are foods that have not been through the huge processing machinery that is our modern American food system. So kind of the difference between having oatmeal that is minimally processed, like rolled oats, for example, versus oatmeal that is like they've got those little instant oatmeal packages where you just kind of tear it, you pour it into a cup and add hot water, and boom, you got sugar and oatmeal kind of stuff. That's probably better than eating a Twinkie or something for breakfast. However, there's still a lot of sugars and sometimes fats and other things that basically get thrown into the processed versions of these foods. And so when the choice is between eating, let's say, an egg and eating your instant oatmeal packet, and eating a steak for breakfast or something, out of those options, I would definitely pick the instant oatmeal packet over any of the other two by any way or means. So anyway, so his green light is as much as you like unprocessed plant foods, and that also, by the way, includes avoidance of oils. And a lot of people look at me funny when I tell them that oil is not really very healthy for you. Not ghee, not olive oil, not coconut oil, none of them. I mean, the flax oils I've occasionally had recommended, especially in my earlier days, to folks with suffering from arthritis and so forth. But I found, generally speaking, that getting the flax seed and grinding it yourself, you're going to get more than enough oils from that directly. Because when you take a olive, for example, and you put it under very high pressure and you heat it, and basically do all the processing things that the company does to it, well, essentially, you're getting yourself olive juice, which has very, yes, sorry, Gravinda, not even the olive oil. And that was a big surprise to me, actually. And I've told the story a couple times already on these presentations. But it wasn't until a very close friend of mine was actually in the hospital just recovering from his first heart attack that I went to Dr. Greier's website and looked for, okay, what is the latest and greatest for heart disease? And he had the presentations on basically why the olive oil, although it's been touted as being very healthy, and again, this is another one of those health myths that is out there, why it actually also does contribute to the diabetes and to the hardening of the arteries and the stiffening of the arteries so that they cannot open and relax and allow the passage of blood through there. And essentially, the oils are very, very highly processed and essentially concentrated, basically a little bit junky, I guess is a short way of saying it. And the idea is that if you eat an actual olive, you're going to get naturally some amount of the olive oil that is naturally present in that olive, but you're also getting all the phytonutrients, you're getting all the fiber, you're getting all the other bits and pieces of the olive that you'd be missing if you just had the olive oil. An analogy would also be orange juice, for example. It's far, far better to actually eat an orange than it is to just get the squeezed juice from it, because at least with the orange, you're getting all the fiber and all the other good stuff that goes along with it. And with the juice, you're losing a lot of that fiber, so it really spikes the sugars very quickly, which could be handy if you're diabetic with really low blood sugar for some reason or another. But generally speaking, it's better to try to get the foods in as minimally processed a form as possible. Now, all that being said, there are some wonderful, wonderful things that can be done with it. No oils at all, even if we have young children. Well, again, this goes back to my earlier statements as to what is the path of humanity, where it is that we've been throughout our life and our journey. And in the places in the world where people have very, very little or no heart disease, they also do not have a culture of oils. For example, I've got a patient of mine who is about to travel to Africa and was telling him about the same diet pattern that I talk about all the time. And I said, look, watch what the people in that country are eating. This is one of the countries that's well known for having a plant-based diet. And when you're living in the middle of nowhere and you're living far from the olive trees, well, basically, where is your olive oil going to come from? It's not going to be there. I saw some documentaries of some folks over in the Amazon rainforest who are probably about as close to living in some of the prehistoric times, obviously, again, as changed through the eons and their cultures and all that kind of stuff. And again, they're not going to be eating processed oils of any sort, and their kids grow up just fine. As a matter of fact, our bodies are constantly trying to get rid of the effects of the oils that are in our daily life. It causes some inflammation in there, as well as gallstones. One of the things that people don't realize is that our bodies are very, very well designed for plant foods. When you put a lot of whole plant foods into the system, then a lot of good things happen. Artery disease reverses and so forth, as I mentioned before. And when you start adding processed oils to it, one, the oils have a very direct route into our, tapping on my butt here, can't see it off camera, but to our fat cells, essentially. It takes very, very little energy to process an oil, to take it from the food and put it into the fat cells. And so if you're surviving the ice ages, for example, again, taking another snapshot of where humanity most likely was a while ago, Well, if you're living up in the ice ages and you're starving and all you guys can bring down is a mammoth because, it's the dead of winter, the ice is a mile thick, and you don't have any room to grow carrots, well, basically, your entire body and physiology is going to be switched over to survive the Arctic freeze physiology. Even the gut bacteria change over to the kind of gut bacteria that cause you to cling to every precious calorie and survive the depth of the winter. And so our physiology is remarkably adept at surviving at least till reproductive age. A long time ago, people rarely lived past age 25 or 30. They were dying off from one problem or another for a lot of our modern human history. At any rate, so the idea is that our physiology is flexible and that we can go from starvation mode to the tropics or a land of plenty where there's plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables. Even if you look at our modern grazing habits, people have a tendency to eat the foods that are closest to them. We're not usually getting rearing out to go chase down a rabbit or something. And so we like to have things that are handy and close. And so Deepti, the answer to that for me, as I'm telling my patients and so forth, is essentially I really highly recommend not using food products that have added oils to them. It does not mean a completely no-fat diet. It's essential to get some amount of nuts and seeds and similar kinds of things into your children. And then the other thing that people don't realize is that pretty much anything that's alive has cell walls, and all of those cell walls naturally have a certain amount of lipids or oils naturally present in them. It's just that when we're taking the artificial stuff, the stuff that's been highly processed and engineered and in many cases adulterated, a lot of people don't realize that the labeling laws, there's not a heck of a lot of people that are sitting out there going to your extra virgin olive oil bottle and comparing it to real olive oil straight from an actual olive and saying, oh, well, this one actually has 12% of palm oil or something else added to it, because basically a lot of people can't tell the flavor difference between the extra virgin and one of the other ones, but you can sell the extra virgin for a much higher price. So there's been a few exposés that I've read over the years where people are thinking they're getting one product and they're actually getting something adulterated. But even if you're getting the extra virgin olive oil, it still is going to have a deleterious effect on the body and to contribute to the hardening of the arteries as well as the blockages, as well as obesity and many other things. So oils, believe it or not, things that we have held precious in our culture and society, again, to my new knowledge now, this is essentially just another one of those myths that has come and gone. Even the person that wrote the infamous stories about the Mediterranean diet and how this is so good for controlling blood pressure and other kinds of things, well, they knew that the best diet to drop the blood pressure and to drop the other kinds of things was basically a plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet pattern. And that's extremely effective. But the kicker is that they knew they were talking to an American audience, and they knew that the vast majority of people were not even remotely interested in hearing that the foods that our society has taught us from childhood basically are not necessarily the ones that are in alignment with the fullest, healthiest things as well. So Gravinder asks, how about smoothies? And so there's something interesting with the smoothie. There's a few wonderful presentations that Dr. Greger has gone on, and I'll probably make a presentation further about smoothies. But again, you're taking essentially a whole food for the most part, and you're throwing it into a blender and just letting some mechanical chopping happen of it just before you eat it. And so again, I would consider that to be minimally processed. And there's some little caveats for that too. Some foods, specifically when they're thrown into a smoothie, will have a certain effect on the blood sugar and insulin. Like apple and apple juice seems to spike the blood sugar and spike the insulin, whereas mangoes or berries or wheatgrass or spinach and kale and those sorts of things have a very evening effect on the blood sugar. Also, when you're looking at how do nutrients absorb, well, if you have a salad and you add a few nuts or seeds on it, you're going to actually get better absorption of all those phytonutrients, the carotenoids and other things along there. And as far as how much of an avocado per day, as John is asking there, I don't have a very specific recommendation for how much of an avocado to have specifically on there. The people that I'm talking about in these two books of just kind of highlighting some of the things say use a little bit of cautions with the avocados, just because the amount of fats that are in the avocados. Dr. Greger had a few interesting presentations about some of the specific components of the avocados, but when I asked him at last meeting that I was able to attend with him, he said that the jury actually came out on the side of the avocados still being healthy, and so I'll defer you to those presentations. Deep D, I can't see the whole comment on there, and so I'll probably talk with you a little bit later on that. And again, the content of these videos, I'm able to share some general information, but as far as making specific medical advice, that's a little bit beyond what I'm able to do through a video camera to the internet. All right, so I'll have a look at your comment in a few minutes, though, when I finish. All right, so the green, red light, and yellow light system. So the idea is that with Greger's system, the bulk of the foods, when he says green light, the idea is that, thank you, is that these you can eat with abundance, without any hesitations, without any reservations. I mean, eat all the spinach and carrots and pineapples and pick your grain, essentially, that you want. And the good news about it is that when you're eating very little processed or minimally processed, and I mean processed like in your own kitchen kind of stuff with your own chopping block and, graters and things like that, basically you're getting the bulk of the fiber, the bulk of the nutrients. You're essentially hyper-nourishing your body, essentially, because you're allowing all these wonderful carotenoids and other things to get into your system. And really, there is no limit to the amount that you can eat, other than the fact that your tummy is going to get full after a while. And so that's one of the reasons why this is such a beautiful diet pattern for folks who are looking for weight loss, because they don't have to sit there and say, oh my gosh, this is going to have 30 calories or 20 calories or 100 calories. You just go ahead and eat the strawberries, for example, and you don't worry about the calories because you know whatever you put in the body is going to go out the other end. A fun thing with the paleo stuff, just getting back to that, I quite enjoy Dr. Greger's sense of humor and his video presentations, as those who talk to me a lot tend to know. And one of the things that he kind of joked about is that when they put people on a diet that mimicked what people were supposed to be eating about 10,000 years ago, they had the biggest bowel movements of their life because literally they were pooping out 2 pounds worth of food with every sitting. And the idea is that if you get a lot of foods that are rich in fiber, well, guess what? It's going to go right through you. And it's not going to give you any problems along the way. As a matter of fact, it will tend to bind up a lot of so-called toxins and stuff. That we're exposed to a lot of pesticides and chemicals of various sorts, and a lot of that gets detoxed by the liver and squirted out into the intestines via the gallbladder. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why the gallstones form, is because the liver is trying so hard to get rid of the extra cholesterol and fats and stuff that we're taking in through our very, very rich, heavy society foods that we have a tendency to eat. So anyway, as we're getting in all these fibrous foods, all the fiber is binding to and acting as the garbage chute for the stuff that our liver is trying to detox and get rid of. And so if you look at somebody's blood before and after they do a 21-day trial or a 21-day kickstart of some sort, you actually will find that they have lower amounts of these industrial toxins and DDT and all this Teflon and God knows what after they do the plant-based trial. Even if it's for only a few days, the amount of these things will go down in the blood and the urine and other measurements. So anyway, green light means eat with abandon, anything that's basically an unprocessed plant food. And then the yellow light is the caution. So knowing that we're talking to an audience of very, very vastly different problems, different medical problems, different societal problems, different avenues of wanting to change. There's even a willingness to change thing by which people can assess for themselves. All right, well, I've got a problem. Let's say overweight, for example, is a very common thing for a lot of my patients. And they want to take some steps to change that. But for some people, being told, okay, you should eat lots of plants and try to limit your animal products or have no animal products for that matter, depending on how strict or what direction you want your health to go in and that sort of thing. For a lot of people, that is just way too much, and they slam the book, literally, and say, nope, not going to even look at it, and they, stop right there with it. And so the yellow light is essentially for some of these foods which are going to be a little bit more processed, and those foods are going to be, as he says, the processed plant foods and the unprocessed animal foods. So again, this is not giving license to go out and chow down on your steak burger or something, but the idea is that as far as danger and health, and generally speaking, your processed plant foods, those are going to be things like your mock meats, for example. Those can be very helpful. I've got some family members who are not vegetarian by any way, means, or shape, and so when they come to visit, sometimes we'll find some, or at least in the beginning, we were finding some of the ground beef crumbles that were close enough to the feel and the texture and the taste of ground beef that it satisfied the carnivores in the group, but it was still okay for me to eat. Since I've moved more towards the no oil diet, I'm finding that my taste buds have changed, and even the fake ground meat to me seems very, very heavy and kind of binding on the system, so to say. So the idea is that if you're going to be a regular, so to say, the default American position, which is lots of oils and meats and cheeses and things like that, yellow light would be unprocessed animal foods. So in other words, very minimally processed. Those are the folks that are getting like the organic chicken from the chicken farmer. Although I don't think that's going to be giving them the best health, it's probably going to be a heck of a lot better than getting the processed stuff, which is going to have much more higher risk of having things like arsenic and salmonella and so forth from the stores. And then in Dr. Greger's system, the red lights are going to be the foods which are going to be the most damaging to the health. And in his system, that's the ultra-processed plant foods, let's say like Cheetos, for example, or something that is extremely highly processed. So sometimes people will say, well, Twizzlers are vegan, aren't they? And yes, Twizzlers and French fries and potato chips, yeah, technically it's plant food, but they're very highly processed. They're full of fats and sugars and salts and oils and all sorts of things that are not healthy at all, including things like trans fats in some cases, like those little cakes and things like that. And when you really can't understand the ingredients, when you look at it and it looks like it came out of a chemical factory, Well, odds are that it probably did come out of a chemical factory and probably will have similar health problems for you. And then the processed animal foods. So why is that down there at the red light? Well, the processed animal foods are really very equivalent to the cigarettes of the body. They're the most strongly linked with developing, let's say, colon cancer. Sometimes people are surprised when I mention to them that bacon, for example, or hams or lunch meats, all of these highly processed meats, they're really doused in a whole bunch of chemicals, and meat of itself tends to be carcinogenic. If you check out Dr. Greger's video presentations, you'll see a lot of the mechanisms as to why they tend to promote things like cancer and other diseases and so forth. So we found out a lot of the reasons behind it. But of those, the processed animal foods are the most dangerous and the most directly linked with certain particular cancers and stuff. And so, because of his approach, where he's basically telling a broad audience of various ideas and backgrounds and ethnic origins and flavors and palates and so forth, essentially his best attempt at how not to die, he uses a similar approach to what Dr. Ornish talks about in the spectrum, and that is that if you're going to be having food choices, think of it always as a choice between what's going to be better or what's going to be worse. And so the idea is, if you're really in the mood for a chicken sandwich, what's going to be the best thing for you? Are you going to have the brand name chicken that's on the shelf, which has basically unknowns to you until you go watch the presentations from Dr. Greger and learn about these things, that's got some arsenic added to it, basically, that makes the flesh look a little bit pinker so it doesn't look quite as gray when it's sitting next to the chicken meat next to it? Are you going to pick like that, or a chicken nugget, which is, again, highly processed and full of gosh knows what chemicals? By the way, if anybody has not heard of pink slime yet, I encourage you to go learn about pink slime. It's been out there and known publicly, widely, for many years now. It's pretty horrifying and shocking if you finally learn what this stuff is. Hot dogs, for example, similar kind of process. But anyway, so if your choice is going to be a highly processed chicken food versus the chicken food that you're going to be getting from a fast food restaurant, another category again, versus the chicken that's going to be coming from a Mike Tyson's or one of those conventional grocery store chickens that you go bake at home and all that kind of stuff, versus let's say a fake chicken product, which is basically tofu mashed up with breadcrumbs and such in a way that it looks like chicken. By the way, those are very tasty. Back in my old days of eating those products as a kind of a bridge to my current diet pattern, versus eating some chickpeas. Well, out of that spectrum, the chickpeas are going to be the hugely healthiest thing of that list of things to choose from, and obviously not really related to chicken, just similar in the names of chickpeas, chicken. Anyway, so so basically, when you're talking to an extraordinarily diverse audience, any movement that you can get people to move in the direction of healthier quality is going to give them some health benefits. And I've had many people that were able to switch their diet from, I'm going to guesstimate, maybe 10% fruits and vegetables over to maybe 60% fruits, vegetables, plant products, or some folks have joined me in the 100% range over here. And the further that they move along that spectrum from the highly processed, heavy products towards the much lighter and easier to digest plant products, well, the amount of disease that they can get rid of is actually quite amazing. And it's quite humbling to watch, too, because they give people a little flavor of this information. I kind of direct people, okay, look, here's how you can overcome some of these obstacles. And then they come back 6 months later, 3 months later, and lo and behold, they've lost a person of weight sometimes. And basically, I've had people cure their own kidney problems and so forth. It's actually quite amazing and humbling what people are able to do when they have accurate information as well as tools and resources to implement it as well. So that's the green, yellow, and red light system as espoused by Dr. Greger. And again, what they're trying to do is just make things very simple for people so that when you're faced with the spectrum of choices, I'm in the mood for a something, how am I going to most closely match that in a way that fits each person individually? And again, the goals of what people do with this information are going to be highly, highly individual. I've got a friend that is in the process of reversing his coronary artery disease. Now, for him, I really want him to be on the strictest version of this because we know that that's the most fastest way of opening those blood vessels and restoring the blood flow to the heart and being able to keep the heart open and healthy, for forever, hopefully. Maybe not forever, because we all got to go some way or another, but at least not prematurely. It's a very common myth in our society that, actually maybe I should speak on this for a second too, that simply switching from red meat to so-called white meat is going to make a huge impact on the cholesterol, and that simply is honestly not true. I get it all the time where people say, I'm really, really healthy because I'm eating chicken and fish, and especially salmon because it's popularized these days, rather than that, red meat, and definitely not the bacons or not the hot dogs and so forth. So good for you from avoiding the absolute red light, stuff which is full of trans fats and all sorts of artery clogging chemicals and gosh knows what. But at the same time, our society has set us up for some unrealistic expectations about how much is that shift from here to here of the type of animals that are being eaten going to impact your health benefits over here. And most specifically, the cholesterol. There's been some studies that showed that when people switched from red meat to white meat, that they did not significantly change the cholesterol a bit. And yet, that is, again, one of the foundations of the Mediterranean diet. Well, are you supposed to eat more chicken, more fish, and so forth? And again, as mentioned before, the people that authored the Mediterranean diet essentially were trying to offer something they thought people could handle rather than telling them, okay, this is what the best available science shows, and let people decide for themselves, well, how far are they going to go with it, so to say. So another quick point on the types of meats that are out there. It's very commonly called a white meat, and that's pork, the other white meat. And basically what the advertisers have done with that is the definition of a red meat is essentially a mammal. Think about it as a cow or, in truth, a pig. And that is the traditional historical definition of red meat. And if you have somebody that's suffering from gout, for example, they might have believed the advertisements that, well, when you cook a piece of pork, it actually has a kind of a grayish, brownish, lighter color to it than the so-called red meat or the cow meat would do. And so they started labeling themselves the other white meat. Well, if you've got somebody that's suffering from gout and they're thinking, oh, I'm having all this white meat because they're eating a bunch of pork and avoiding the hamburgers and the cows, well, they're going to be quite sore and surprised to discover that their uric acid levels, the things that cause these little sharp needle-like crystals to form, and especially in the great big toes joints, that they're actually getting a load of all of that with the pork, because it actually is in the category of a red meat definition-wise. And the advertisers have tried to essentially change our perception of it by trying to call it something that it isn't. At any rate, if you're trying to switch over from the red meats to the so-called white meats, the chickens and the fishes and so forth, Well, the amount of cholesterol and the amount of impact that that has on our bodies, um, basically, uh, it still is causing the cholesterol to be much, much higher. And the other thing, too, and yes, it's a good point, people do the salmon for the omega 3s. However, salmons are not the only ones that have omega 3s. In fact, if you look at salmons, they also have the inflammatory omega 6s on there, and they also have a lot of saturated fat in there as well, along with dioxins and arsenic and a whole bunch of chemicals that are, unfortunately, our world is increasingly polluted. We're not going up to the side of the mountain and casting our fishing rod into a pristine, unpolluted river these days. There's been a lot of people in these places before, and essentially the plastics and other revolutions have caused our food supply to be very much changed. If you ever get curious, look up to see what are they feeding said cows and fishes and stuff. It made the news recently that a bunch of Skittles, for example, toppled off the side of the road, and the thing that was the big news about that was these were the defective Skittles that were being shipped off to the cow farms because it was cheaper sources of calories than actually feeding the cows, like cow food, like hay or oats or other actual plants. So anyway, I guess if you're trying to fatten a animal quickly, they don't care what they feed it as long as it survives to the table. So that's a whole different topic of conversation. Looking into what things have come into and what has been fed to them is it's quite an interesting story to look back into and see. And then once you learn some of this stuff, you're like, no wonder all these people are having problems downstream, so to say. So getting back to this thing with the myth of red meat versus white meat and the cholesterol, well, the trouble is that actually can be quite a deadly myth because when people are making these choices and they're moving away from one to the other, thinking that they're going to pat themselves in the back and say, oh, I've done this amazing, wonderful, sacrificial thing. I moved from this habit to this habit. And then they come in and are absolutely shocked that their cholesterol doesn't support the gains that our culture and society has led them to think. It can be quite shocking. And also, I say deadly too, because I've actually seen it where people have sometimes stopped their cholesterol medication and thought, okay, well, I'm just going to do these small dietary changes, and thinking that that's going to be strong enough as the statin in preventing the heart disease, and then unfortunately finding out later that, no, unfortunately that was not enough, and having to suffer a heart attack because of this mistaken societal notion. The only diet patterns that I know of that have been shown to open up and reverse the damage that's been done by a lifetime of these food choices is actually the whole food, plant-based, no added oils diet pattern. And actually this might get back to a little of a question that DT was asking earlier, like what about the kids, what about the children? Well, the thing that's also pretty crazy in today's modern society is that even the children are starting to get fatty streaks in their arteries. If you look at the autopsies of children that have been killed in car accidents, basically you're going to find the very, very, very first ounces of heart disease in those arteries. As a matter of fact, if you go even earlier, in some of our pregnant women today that have had miscarriages for one reason or another, and there was a study where they looked at some of the arteries. They started to find those fatty streaks in some of the babies, even before they left the womb, of the women that had the highest amount of cholesterol and so forth. And so the idea is that things like coronary artery disease, they really start early in childhood, and then they slowly tend to progress over time, and it's not until you end up in your 40s if you're a smoker and you're eating this habit, or 50s, again, much higher risk for those who don't exercise and smoke and eat these very rich foods. The idea is that this is very rough on the arteries going to the brain, the arteries going to the heart, and as I'm planning to talk about a little bit more, the arteries to the penis next week as well. So at any rate, the idea is that these different kinds of foods, what you eat has a huge impact on the body. And so if you are somebody who is interested in making a big life change or a big swing over to the thing that Dr. McDougall calls the healthiest diet on the planet. So McDougall has 2 books. He's got this one, The Healthiest Diet on the Planet, and he's also got one called The Starch Solution. And since this is the newer version, I figured I would show this one as well. And again, I apologize for the things showing up backwards on here because of the thing, but because of the nature of the camera. But basically, he has a very similar red light, green light system to what Dr. Greger has, except he's got a middle ground. So for his version, the don't eat is basically the meats and the eggs and the chickens and the animal products. And then the green light, which means eat in abundance, things like the oatmeal and potatoes and breads. And again, he's not saying don't eat vegetables. He's saying basically focus on the breads as the staple or the foundation, or the brown rice. Again, brown rice is better than white because white is processed and has taken away some of the good stuff that's in there. And then for Dr. McDougall's, his careful thing is he's saying the nuts and the avocados and the more highly processed soy products and so forth. And the idea is that if somebody is going to have nuts and seeds and so forth in the diet, which I think is a very, very healthy thing to have, the idea is that you're not sitting there eating peanuts all day long and nothing else. The idea is that, enjoy some peanuts, enjoy some other foods, which are a little bit richer, but don't things. And so don't go too crazy with it, I guess. And so his version is forget about being reasonable, sensible, prudent, or moderate, and facing the reality that when people are making life-changing things with their foods, the idea of a little bit is okay. As I mentioned, with the idea that, I'm just going to switch from one type of meat to another type of meat and think that I'm going to get X health benefit from it, it can be very misleading to think, okay, I'm just going to have a piece of chicken once a month or once a year or once a week. It very quickly becomes once a day and kind of slides on through. Or you might have chicken one day and then fish the next day or something else and think, well, I just haven't had chicken in a long time, so it's okay if I have a little bit. And generally speaking, again, I'm talking to a very broad audience, I understand these presentations, but if you want the most artery opening, disease preventing thing, then even a little bit of some of these very damaging foods can do a long ways towards causing problems. And as he says here, you must fix the food. Moderation does not work for changing life-destroying habits. Cigarette smokers never quit by cutting down. Alcoholics do not sober up by switching from beer to wine. Must treat food poisoning with the same good or evil, right or wrong, stop or go, green or red attitude as you would to treat a drug addiction. And just say no to the foods that are poisoning you and your family. So, again, very strong language, but the essence or the principle of it is basically sorted out by the science as well. The idea is that the stricter that you are with these things, if you've got coronary artery disease or something that you really want to change, like multiple sclerosis is another life-altering disease that responds very nicely to a whole food plant-based diet as well. And then the idea is that people have this tendency to think a little bit won't hurt, and unfortunately, a little bit very much can hurt the body. And so his version is the healthiest diet on the planet is based on starches with vegetables and fruits, does not contain any animal foods or vegetable oils, and may contain a little bit of salt, sugar, or spices, and so forth. And so he's got a beautiful series of photographs just kind of saying that the food poisoning, so to say, as I will agree, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, constipation, cancer, stomach problems, and so forth. And so in order to make it simple, he calls animal foods and vegetable oils as the most common sources of food poisoning out there. And all sorts of things as well. So again, oils are very empty calories. They don't have a lot of nutrition with them, and so forth. And so with his version, he's got a very nice thing with saying photographs of things that he's saying eat lots of foods, start green leafies, and so forth. And so pointing out that gladiators were fueled on barley, for example. Also a little historical trivia for you. And some of the research articles. So he's got a very nice series of presentations in here as to why on the red light foods are the eggs, the dairies, cheeses, and in his system red light means don't touch it at all. The vegetable oils and margarines and the fake meats and the cheeses and so forth. Whereas eating lots of all large populations throughout history ate starches, corn, rice, potatoes, wheat, so cereals, oatmeals, pancakes with whole wheat, buckwheat, potato, no oil or dairy or eggs in them, lots of soups and so forth. So what he's really trying to do is make this about as simple as possible. I also get that question a lot, like, well, what do you eat when you're eating these? Well, here's some more ideas: brown rice, pastas, rice and vegetable dishes, grain-based salads where you're using things like quinoa and so forth to help you out. Whole grain bean patty burgers, beans are very healthy, and some non-starchy vegetables. So sometimes people think that they're gonna go plant-based and then land up with a pile of spinach and carrots and they're going to wither away and starve to death. Because they're essentially replacing a strong calorie source with something that doesn't have a lot of calories. And that's probably one of the mistakes that people make in the beginning, just because they're not really well versed on, well, how do you cook quinoa? How do you cook whole grain? How do you cook oatmeal? Or they forget about these things being out there. Potatoes, essentially people can survive on potatoes almost alone. I would not recommend a potato alone diet, but basically those are going to have some calories. They're going to have some fuel to them. Beans, again, not only are they really rich in the micronutrients that are extraordinarily good for heart health and other healthy things, but they also have calories. They're not a super low calorie food, and so forth. So the idea is, when you're building your individual diet, I highly recommend starting with one of these resources and using it as guidelines and building your own personalized menu. Everybody is going to have different tastes, different inclinations, different cultures, different families, all of those things that I covered a little bit of in the identity video a few weeks ago. And that's going to play a huge role in an individual choosing what is going to be best for them and what is going to be best for their family. So somebody might want to have a lot of Indian spices. Somebody might want to have chilies. Somebody else might want to have very bland food. It's all going to be very, very personal preference. Italian food is a wonderful thing when you're eating plant-based, by the way. And so the idea is to take some of the information and use it as guidelines, and maybe take some of the recipes. There are some wonderful recipes out there. Dr. Greger actually apparently is coming up with a book that I think is going to be released this fall, where he's actually building recipes based on his daily dozen, the foods that have got the greatest amount of benefit, in his opinion, to give the most bang for your buck if you're going to have a spice, pick turmeric, for example, and so forth. So that's pretty much it. I would definitely recommend Googling and looking up whole food, plant-based, no oil recipes, and just kind of having a look-see and add some to your life. The Nutrition MD website that I refer people to a lot, Dr. Barnard's brainchild, has 1,086 low-fat, plant-based, no added oil recipes, and that can be a great place to get started. I've had some people have some wonderful successes with this 21-day Kickstart program. And so, again, it's been lovely talking with you guys tonight. Thank you for the questions. It kind of makes it a little bit more interactive on here. And I'll go ahead and have a look at that long question that I wasn't able to see during the I'm only able to essentially see a very small line of letters on the screen on here, so a long multi-line question is a little hard for me to stop and read in the middle of the presentation. Anyway, so thanks. I hope you enjoyed Roho TV, or my Doc Talk tonight, as I've been calling it. Thanks, Gurvinder. Thanks for showing up, and thanks for playing. And next week, we'll be talking about a different topic, and hope to see you then. Bye-bye.